Once upon a time, there were two little girls named Deb. One little girl grew up to be a preacher while the other grew up to be a pagan, and they both grew up to be the very best of friends. Join the preacher and the pagan as they take a fresh look at Christianity, from the inside out and the outside in.
Hello, world. This is Deb from the U.S., and I've got Deb Sutter on the other side. Hi, Deb.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. We are going... Well, first of all, welcome to The Preacher and the Pagan. This is our holiday episode. We're going to talk about Christmas, Yule, why we celebrate, what we celebrate, and doggone it, who has the right to claim whatever. Right, Deb?
It is. And you know what? It is my favorite time of year. I mean, you know this about me. I start watching Christmas movies and doing stuff in July. So I'm always good. I'm always good for this topic. Yeah. It's so much fun. It's so much joy. But you know, it wasn't always the way.
No. I know that the Victorians were the ones that started making Christmas a holiday thing. Before that, it was really a somber event, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. It was considered very penitential for good 1,000 years in the Christian church. And it's not an original holiday, but it dates right back. I think the earliest reference to Christmas is 360, where the people in charge of the day, I can't remember exactly who it was, put Christmas in their liturgical calendar as something to be celebrated in the wider Christian world. So it doesn't go back to the first days, but it goes pretty far back in our history.
Dude, he had to wait 360 years after he died before he got a birthday party?
Well, you have to remember.
Cold, man.
Well, yeah, but birthdays are Roman. The Hebrews didn't celebrate birthdays.
Really?
So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So to celebrate Jesus' birthday, this is like the Roman Christians were the ones that really kind of pushed that. The Hebrew Christians, it wasn't on their docket. Like, they recognized coming of age. So obviously they tracked years and when a person's boy child's bar mitzvah would be, but they didn't celebrate birthdays. Romans were the ones that did that. So yeah, it didn't really make any sense for the Hebrews to celebrate something for Jesus they didn't celebrate for anybody else.
I was today years old when I learned that. I had no idea about that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That is crazy. So basically, the Romans about 360 years ago have decided that Jesus needed a birthday party.
Well, actually, at 360, they put it on the calendar, which meant it had been celebrated for a while. They just formalized it at that point in time.
So how did they come to the date of... Now, I've heard several different things. I've heard that according to the astronomy of the time, the Jesus's actual birthday is speculated to be somewhere in March, but they chose the date of December 25th to correspond with Saturnalia. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, no one was there to actually record any of this. So the best we've got is theories. Okay. So there's a few reigning theories in the Christian church on this, and neither one of them are great, but they kind of, they speak to different ideologies on stuff. So one of them is that, actually, you know what? I'm going to back up a little bit. You know how in any organization or in any movement, like anything from Girl Guides and Girl Scouts to veganism to religion to whatever organized community you're in, there's your really hardcore focus in the middle, and there's your adherents around the outside. Mm-hmm. So I want to break the two theories that I'm aware of into those two different categories. So the really hardcore, so all your bishops and your academics and everybody in the core, they worked on something that it was basically like a counting theory. So if the spring equinox was the beginning of the year, which it was for a lot of people. That's right around the time when Passover happened for the Hebrew folk. And there's a number of other harvest festivals. But they believed that the new year started around spring equinox. So, and that's also believed to be the time when Mary conceived Jesus. So you go 9 months out, and we're at the, okay, you know what? I'm getting my equinoxes and my solstice.
No, you're right.
Okay, so spring equinox, winter solstice.
Winter solstice, yes.
Yeah, okay. So in 9 months after the spring equinox was the winter solstice. And it just happened when you went back in time to identify this. Nisan 14, the 14th day of Nisan in the Hebrew calendar is the day of Passover. And that year, whatever year it was identified back in the back when Jesus was believed to have lived in Passover around 33, that year also fell on the day of the spring equinox, which happened to be March 25th.
Mm-hmm.
So you project out, and that means that December 25th, if we assume a perfect 9-month pregnancy, which every mother who's given birth on listening to this podcast is going to snicker because that's never accurate. If you assume 9 months out, then that puts Jesus' birth on the 25th of December.
Okay.
So that's one theory. And because John the Baptist was born 6 months before Jesus, that puts his birthday on the summer solstice, which is still celebrated as the Feast of John Baptist around the world, or here in Canada, Quebec refers to it as Jean Baptiste, and that's like a major holiday. So that's one theory. Another theory is that when the Romans, I mean, as we said, like Romans was a birthday celebration. As the Romans started to the Christian Romans started to reinterpret their feasts and holidays through a Christian lens, they started to rethink Saturnalia and some of the others and using Christian symbolism. It just kind of got kind of like a layer cake. It kind of got symbolism kind of got piled on each other. And eventually they started looking at the festival for the returning sun, the returning of light, actually, as the birth of Jesus, the new enlightenment, the new wisdom, the new light of God. So it wasn't that anybody came in and took over a holiday. It's just that holiday was seen from a different perspective, because at that time, there were Christians throughout all areas of Roman government, all areas of society. So if the first theory, the counting theory, is what the inside kind of academics and experts came up with, the revision of current festivals was probably what the adherents and what the popular culture was doing. So those are the two functioning theories. Now, I think there's kind of probably a mix of both and some more in there that we haven't figured out yet. But that's kind of sort of what was going on. And Christianity became legal, became a reason to not kill people in the early 300s. So chances are really good that by that point in time, this kind of notion of celebrating Christ's birth was already permeating the Gentile part of the Christian world. So it would just kind of naturally evolve with celebration once the concern about persecution had been lifted.
And you bring me to this is a perfect segue to something that you and I have talked about for years, and I know it's a huge sticking point for you. There is a lot of, I don't know how you would describe it, but there's a lot of talk in social media of how Christians stole paganism and all of that, and not to get into any of the politics of it, but I just want to look at it from my perspective, which is, what is the difference between stealing something and just happen to being the same?
Yeah.
I in our tradition, the Kat and I do celebrate Solstice. We also celebrate Christmas. It's the death of I think it's the Holly King dies, and the King of Light is born, the holly and the ivy, that whole thing. Mm-hmm. But, as I'm reviewing all of this, if you go all over the world, from Norway to Mexico, you are going to find every culture has a winter solstice celebration. You're looking at people who are starving through the winter. The minute they see that solstice and they know the days are going to start getting longer and the sun's going to start coming back, yes, every single culture is going to find some kind of celebration, some kind of mythology to say, look, there's hope. We can get through the rest of this winter. We can't feed the animals. Let's kill them. Let's have a huge feast. Let's praise the gods. Let's get through this winter. So in almost all of, especially in the northern regions, they couldn't afford to feed the animals in the dead of winter because they didn't have enough grain to feed themselves and the animals. So they would slaughter cattle and larger animals just because. So they had a preponderance, just a glut of meat. They'd have a festival. They'd sing praises to their gods. They do all the different rituals. In the Norse, give offerings to the gods in trees, and they burn the Yule log. These were all things that they did. And around the world, because the situation that these ancient people had to deal with was so similar, they came up with similar responses. So to just say, nope, the Romans just kind of stole it. Well,
yeah. That has, first of all, has no respect for ancient peoples, because the notion that you steal culture. I mean, you can steal a necklace, you can steal a home, you can even steal land, but you cannot steal culture. You can suppress it, but it always pops up. The thing was that you're right. People have very limited imaginations in many ways, and food and light and dance and music are part of every celebration, every part of the year. It doesn't matter what culture, if they've ever interacted with anybody else. These are things that humans just do. And over time, they develop more meaning and more symbolism. So all we're looking at really is that this theology, this understanding of Jesus, came out of Palestine first, went into Roman territory. Yeah, it merged with some of the practices that the Romans were doing. But remember, it was just a couple of hundred years after Christianity was allowed to be an accepted tradition and eventually became the dominant religion in the area, that Western Rome collapsed. So it's not like there was, too far apart to be a direct correlation, but too close to.
Just checking.
I know, I heard that. But too close to just kind of ignore that there was this merging that happened. And as Christians moved out, because the Roman legion was full of Christians too. It wasn't they were all pagans. They didn't all worship Mithras. There are Christian churches and temples and sacred places wherever the Roman legions went too. And just people started sharing the story. And one of the ways you can tell that Christianity just didn't come in and go, bang, your tradition is gone, we're taking it, is if you look at how Christmas is celebrated throughout the world, it is very, very different. I mean, we've got the similar things like gift giving and light and food and music that every festival has. But there's specific things that are uniquely Mexican and uniquely Norwegian and uniquely Japanese and uniquely Canadian and American about how we do things. So it's not a matter of rubber stamping a tradition on top of something else. It's a matter of melding and weaving two understandings. And over 1800 years, our understanding of that tradition has morphed, and these pagan indigenous traditions kind of got woven into the new Christian ideas, which at the same time were still being in development. Christianity was not fully bloomed and rationalized by the year 300, 400. I mean, it was still being thought out. There were still arguments about what Christian theology looked like. So it was not even a done deal at that point in time on the side of the Christians. So everything was developing, and the more they entertained different cultures, the more there is basically these cultural conversations, and they saw similar things in each other, and they just kind of merged them together. And there's nothing stealing in that. That's just how cultures develop when they meet each other.
And this brings up something that I actually have really, really pondered. And for a long time, I've tried to find this distinction, this clarification in my mind, because cultural appropriation is a huge issue in the United States, and it's a serious issue. It is too. But where does cultural appropriation begin and cultural influence end? You know, I grew up in a very mixed culture. There were a lot of African Americans. There were a lot of white people. There were a lot of Vietnamese refugees who moved to that part of the country after the war. So there was a lot of influx of different cultures, not so much in the country, but definitely in the cities. You cannot live and work with people of another culture and survive if you don't at least acknowledge and accept their traditions, their society. As you live and work with people, you pick things up. You will pick up phrases that a coworker says or that a schoolmate says. You will listen to the music that they're listening to. They will listen to yours. The age of the attempts at homogenization, history in the United States and probably Canada will tell you that the attempt of the majority to homogenize the cultures, they're nothing short of disastrous. My father was not allowed to speak French. He was a native French speaker in Louisiana. He was not allowed to speak French in school. He was punished if he spoke French in school. In a single generation, they almost wiped out the Cajun French dialect because they wanted to Americanize those children. So where is that balance between the far extreme of wiping out a minority culture and the other far extreme of appropriating it? We're living somewhere in the middle of that.
Yeah, and I think for that we have to defer to a lot of Indigenous thinkers. I mean, first of all, Canadian culture has appropriation issues as well, but we have a cultural understanding called the mosaic. This came out in my lifetime anyway. I don't think it goes back to the 60s, but definitely it was a thing in the 80s where we looked at everybody's different culture to bring out the beauty in that culture, so that there's no such thing as all Canadian. It doesn't exist. So everybody is encouraged to kind of mingle and share who they are. In fact, that's one of the reasons Canadian political folks are invited overseas is to show how people of different cultures can live side by side without giving away who they are. So that's a difference between American and Canadian approaches. Not that we're perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I think what I have read on the matter is that we have to start distinguishing between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. And the dividing line, as I have read it, is cultural appropriation is where you take on the practices, the symbolism, the superficial identifiers of a culture while at the same time denigrating them. That's appropriation. Cultural appreciation is, the little girl who is fascinated by Japanese culture and wants to perform a tea ceremony. People who are trying to, who look as white as the driven snow as I do, but are trying to identify if they have Indigenous culture in their heritage and how much of that culture they can now be part of. Right. So there is a real concern, but I think appreciation is not also given the amount of attention that it needs to be. It's looking at where we connect, what we have in common, where we can overlap, what we can enjoy. I mean, my favorite foods will never be foods that come from the British Isles. For a lot of reasons.
I'm sorry, I'm a French descent. I'm not going to argue that with you.
Well, right, exactly. But it's not cultural appropriation for me to have my birthday celebration at a sushi restaurant or make Indian food for my kids. Mm-hmm. That's an appreciation of part of the culture. But at no point am I going to denigrate those cultures while I'm eating some of my favorite foods. So I think that's the line of distinction. And we always, especially those of us in the dominant culture, always have to keep an eye on what is appropriation. And that is a conversation that more modern people have to be part of, because we're also, until about the 1700s, before what's known as the age of exploration, a lot of these relationships were trade relationships. And yeah, there were wars and didn't get along and whatever else, but it wasn't with the intention. It was usually about a land grab or a wealth grab. It was not about genocide, which is what did come out of the exploration, especially when the European explorers and the militaries and business folk started to go into Asia and Africa and North America and South America. Prior to that, there isn't the same type of extinction process. And I say that with the condition that I am not as familiar as I should be with the disappearance of the indigenous cultures in Northern Europe. Because I know that there was some issues there, and I don't know if it was a matter of some form of genocide or if it was a matter of intermarriage, intermingling, which also happens right across the world. So that also is how culture spread. You have mom has one tradition, dad has another tradition. I have to merge them to make my identity. So that's another way that it spread, which is not appropriation. It is appreciation and further development as they merge going forward.
And you bring up a really good point. So let's say you've got one generation. Let's say mom's best friend is from another culture, and she makes this dish and brings it to the family potluck. Mm-hmm. She's the neighbor, and she teaches mom how to make it. And right. Mom loves making it. And mom teaches her daughter how to make it.
Yep.
And her daughter. 2-3 generations, nobody's going to remember that neighbor.
That's right.
But 3 generations, this is grandma's recipe that she passed down to mom, she passed down to me. And that is how this sort of thing tends to happen. It's not because somebody said, I'm going to steal Mrs. Johnson's recipe. It's because Mrs. Johnson shared it with Mrs. Jones or whatever name you have. And Mrs. Jones's family just embraced it and kept it going.
Yep, absolutely.
Without ever understanding the cultural relevance of this wonderful, tasty meal or this beautiful song that they love so much, or this style of hair or style of dress. So cultural appropriation, I would think, would be more intentional, whereas appreciation is just you were exposed to it and you love it. Curry. Do you know, I never realized that I loved curry. The first time I had curry was when I was in my 20s. I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and I went to my first Indian restaurant and I tasted curry. And I had this incredible wave of homesickness when I tasted it, and I didn't understand why. I did not realize that when I was growing up, my mom had tasted curry somewhere, and she used it in a lot of her cooking. But I had no idea that I was eating curry. Mm-hmm. But the minute I tasted Indian food and I tasted that curry, and I don't have a drop of Asian Indian blood in my body, I felt like home. Because this was part of my experience, even though it's not part of my culture.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's where, when I talk about like the center core and the outer adherence, where the public lives, I think that is the distinction. The center core often has visions of imperialism or visions of forcing their version to the rest of us. But if the outside core, kind of like the softer puff of the donut, if you will, doesn't buy into it, then all your center ideologues are kind of stuck. But in the meantime, what's happening in the puffy donut part is that people are mingling. They are sharing. I mean, there's things that I have in my possession that my mother brought back from her various travels before I was even conceived. But because they were hers, they carry memories, and I haven't got a clue where they came from. But you're right, we integrated, and that's with all holiday traditions. There's certain things that you just do because, and you follow through because they remind you of something. And the early Christians, the early pagans, the people who lived 1,000, 2,000 years ago, they were no different from us in doing it. And oftentimes when you encounter something new, it's kind of attractive. You want to know more about it.
Yes.
I was just talking with my kids yesterday about how Roman imperialism worked. It wasn't that these constant phalanxes of Roman soldiers would go in and destroy everything and then force their will on it. I mean, these were well-built, handsome guys, maybe some of them, who married locally. These were people who saw that the Romans had nicer material in their clothes, or had food that they didn't really encounter before and wanted to have more of it. This is actually how culture develops. It's not by sword, it's by just human conversation back and forth.
Exactly. And
when we get to Christmas, I mean, when you add elements of joy and fun into that, it continues on. Even if Christianity, if the Advent leading up to Christianity was a more somber penitential time within Christian tradition, it didn't mean that the people on the ground were not looking forward or remembering their cultural celebrations and dancing and joy. And come Christmas morning, it was like free for all lights and sounds and tastes and celebration going on. Exactly. So tell me something.
Yes.
I grew up, my parents were British. We had a Yule log as a kid, as we called it, a Yule log. What's some of the stuff that you have over time developed as strictly, not as strictly, but as contributing from pagan culture? Because growing up, the only thing I knew from another culture was the Christmas tree. Had originally, I mean, the story we had was that it was brought in by Martin Luther into the church. It was baptized and just became part of it. And then it was Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, that brought it to British culture. And then from there, it kind of spread everywhere.
Right.
But there was Yule logs before there was Christmas trees.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do celebrate solstice and we celebrate Christmas. Solstice, we don't do a lot of traditional things in our house. We're not a very traditional family, but there is the Yule log. We do exchange gifts. I know a lot of my pagan friends do have rituals on solstice, basically a welcoming of the light. A lot of pagans do, and this is what we believe too, with the death of the Summer King actually happens at Samhain, which is the
fall equinox,
Halloween. Yes. So Samhain, and that time between Samhain and Yule is when the world is dark, when the world is waiting for the birth of the Sun King. And this is normal. This is that fallow period where everything is at rest. And then the birth starts the new year. And it's normal, it's a cycle. And we feel it. We actually feel this cycle of the year because, it is a cycle. You're like, okay, good God, summer is coming to an end. We're getting to the fall. We'll have cool weather. We don't have extremes in seasons the way you do up north. We're here in the desert. We have monsoon, we have sweltering heat, and we have paradise. Those are our seasons. But it's still an idea that this cycle of the year is coming to an end. that period between Halloween and Yule is that time where just everything sort of stops. You've got in at least here in the United States, you've got it's your holiday season. It's Thanksgiving, it's Christmas, it's New Year's. It's like everything ends and starts again. And you celebrate that. You celebrate that with presents. You celebrate that with treats. You celebrate that with parties. Kat is a huge baker. Every year we're trying to get a little less extreme on the baking because frankly, we don't need all that baking. But
it's her happy place, right? It
is her happy place. And that's one of the things we love to do is Kat will bake and we will go bring gifts to everyone. Mm-hmm. We don't have family here. We are friends because of the situation. We're kind of isolated, but we will find people to give gifts to if we can, because it just feels so good. And that is sort of what the whole solstice tradition is about that hope, that it's all coming back. You have a lot, you can share a lot. You want to be happy. You want that light back in your life. And it comes every year, whether you want it to or not. You want to be in your gloom, you can be in your gloom, but somehow it's going to sneak in. And I'm the worst at it. I am such a curmudgeon. I'm not a holiday person. I just don't care. But my wife is like you. She would start watching Hallmark holiday movies in July if I'd let her.
Let her? Come on. They're fun. They're fun.
No, she wouldn't watch them in July because she's too much of a traditionalist, but I can't stand those movies. Come on, Deb.
What? You know what's going to happen. It's like relaxing into a warm bubble bath.
It's like Greek drama. It's like you can all stand in the stadium and yell the words before they're even spoken.
And?
You say that like it's a good thing.
Oh, it is. It is. I mean, the thing with Christmas that is so joyous. I mean, I'm actually kind of envious that you have a season of rest and reflection and quiet, because here, I mean, first of all, I'm a mom of 4 kids. So there was never a time in the last 25 years when I didn't have a million things to do. But because of my profession, of course, leading up to Christmas and calm is not a thing. People have asked me before what I do to celebrate Christmas Day. It's like, are you kidding? I go for a nap. I put the turkey in the oven. We have unwrapped the presents. I go for a nap and trust that the family's going to take care of everything else.
I have been telling you for years that your life would be so much easier if you just were a shameless heathen.
Yeah, possibly. But I love it. There's something, you're right. I mean, about the season, not about the heathens thing necessarily. Now the shameless, that's something we can discuss. But there is a joy of the newness and the gift giving. I mean, that's another thing that every culture had before it kind of got merged into whatever umbrella celebration you want, is the tradition of the gift giver. And it's fun to give. And I'm always excited when my kids kind of cross over that line and realize that giving is so much better than getting. And it's almost like a win as a mom. It's like, okay, yes, another one of them gets this. And all my kids are at that now. And it's kind of fun also to talk to kids in church about St. Nicholas. Like I never raised my kids with the whole Santa Claus myth. And it used to kill them not to ruin this for other kids. And they were telling me at dinner last night that when my back was turned, they did a few times. But the whole notion of the actual St. Nicholas, that he was at the Council of Nicaea in 320, and he agreed with the statement that Jesus is incarnate, was kind of huge for the kids in church one Sunday. And when I point out to them, yeah, Jesus was or it's not Jesus, Santa Claus really was Christian. Their eyes kind of popped at that point in time, or St. Nicholas rather. I have to work really hard in churches to make sure with parents where they are on that myth spectrum as far as Santa Claus and St. Nicholas. But and then you get into other cultures and the gift giving thing. I mean, that's something paganism had as well, right? That
yes,
they had history of gift giving, and I think that's so essential for a celebration of new life. You have to have something to mark it, and something like tangible to mark.
I think that's one of the problems that so many people have with when they talk about the materialization of the season, because honestly, it's not just the Christians. Every culture has gifts, they send, but people forget that it's not the money that you spend. It's not getting the best gift. It's not standing. Oh my God, don't even talk to me about Black Friday.
Yeah, that's just not a thing up here.
Oh my God, it's huge. Well, it's not because of COVID. It's not as much, but Kat and I have a Black Friday tradition. We stay home and we watch Christmas-based horror movies.
Oh, excellent.
It is so much. There are actually some really great Christmas-based horror movies out there.
There are. Yeah, that's the ones my daughter watches too. You and my daughter get along very well on this matter.
But the idea is that you get so caught up in, are you buying the perfect gift? Or are you doing this, that you forget
what the whole thing's about.
The point is not, oh my God, I scored points. I bought the best gift. The point is, how's that person going to feel when they open this gift and they know that you went to the trouble to find that gift for you? You went to the good trouble to care enough to try to get that gift. That is what people forget when they talk about the commercialization of Christmas or the holidays.
Yep. Yeah. When my kids were younger, a couple of my boys particularly, they talked about how Christmas doesn't really matter anymore because it's all about consumerism anyway. And I mean, this is like your typical age of not believing aged kids. So it was age appropriate for them to interpret the world that way. But I thought, how sad. I mean, these are kids that just 2 years ago or 2 years before, Christmas morning was one of the best times ever. Let's see what toy sets they got and how they're able to spend their day. Within a couple of years had gone into this kind of depth of despair almost, that Christmas was just about spending money and just about one-upping each other, and that the whole point of the season had been lost. These are kids raised in a Christian household where I never ever talked about the Christmas myth. So they're looking at wider society around them and coming to that assessment as kind of newly minted teenagers or just about, and how prevalent that must be, how much loss and disappointment there must be for people who don't have that underpinning of celebration and joy and gift giving and newness of season and coming of new life. Like, I don't know how folks manage without that desire for something more than we are at that time of year, because that's what kind of the season's about. It's not about whatever the commercials tell us that we're supposed to spend money on.
It's honestly, I come from the United States, honey, and we got all the controversy on this because there are members who will boycott companies because they don't put Jesus on their coffee cups. We won't mention any names, Starbucks. But
which people up here mock, by the way. I'm just telling you how the world responds.
It's okay. We mock them too. I'm sorry. But the fact is, whenever I hear that whole reason for the season, no.
Yeah. Whoever shot that should be fired from poetry school.
My gosh. Yeah. I mean, talk about and now look at me, I'm doing my Canadian boots. Talk about the arrogance. Yeah. Talk about the freaking arrogance of it.
And there's another example of people who've totally lost the joy and the meaning behind it all.
I'm so sorry. I was raised Catholic. I am a declared pagan. I celebrate Christmas. I celebrate solstice, but I am not living in a vacuum. I know there are people around me celebrating Hanukkah. They are celebrating Kwanzaa. They are celebrating their own family traditions. I know that I am not part of the only religion in the whole stupid world. People, you are not the reason for the season. You are the reason for your liturgical season. You are the reason, that is the reason for your spirituality's season. It is not the only season out there. And wake up, you don't live alone in this world.
No, and that's a real bugaboo that's really obnoxious. This whole notion that unless you mention Christmas, that somehow you're being disrespectful to a group of people. It's like, hello, that's the only thing you're looking at. You're being disrespectful for an entire other several groups of people. There's so many celebrations this year, and at the time of year, and the thing that I really have a great fun with is that with the if you take out the nuances of each of the celebrations, they all look alike. They all share light. They all share food. They all share generosity in some form, whether it's gift giving or time spent or whatever, or volunteering. They all share a recognition of home and hearth. They all share hope, joy.
And how limiting to just limit yourself. I'm so sorry if I'm surrounded by people who have food from all different cultures for their holidays, and they want to say, hey, happy whatever, and here, take this delicious food. I'm going to take it. I'm going to say thank you very much and happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. And I work on the phones. I work in customer service. God save me. And I try never to assume that somebody, if it's Christmas, I'm not going to just assume you're celebrating Christmas. I'm not going to look at your name and make an assumption. I'm just going to say happy holidays. I'm going to say, it's like when I get calls and people hear my voice and they realize I'm a woman of a certain age and they immediately say happy Mother's Day to me. Like, dude, I am a lesbian. I have not used that reproductive material. I'm not a mom, but just because I look like I'm a mom, you're going to tell me happy Mother's Day and make that assumption of me. It offends me. I mean, not a lot, but it's the whole point. You can't just look at a woman of a certain age and assume that she is a heterosexual, that she is a mother. So why would you look at a person and assume that they're a Christian?
Or assume a Black person isn't Jewish, or assume an indigenous person isn't a leader in some other faith tradition.
Exactly.
It's a little bit of cultural myopia going on there. Actually, a whole lot of it. Yeah.
And it's just a matter of basic respect. It's a matter that you think because you are part of the dominant whatever, that yours is the only opinion that matters. Yours is the only belief and tradition that matters. And that is just categorically untrue.
I think this is also something where the different, like your U.S. experience and my Canadian experience are very different. One of the things I was so impressed by our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau during the beginning of COVID is that COVID in 2020 was right around the time of Easter, Passover, a number of other traditions. And he started just about every press conference, in which he was doing daily, with the appropriate greeting in the appropriate spiritual language for whatever tradition was being celebrated that day. So I heard him greet Sikhs in their language and Jews in their language. Christians got both French and English. People from India, people from Iran, whatever it was, he addressed them in their traditional language and gave them blessings for their holiday. And I think that's really a Canadian sensibility in many ways, that we recognize that there's so much else going on. I think we're a lot further on this conversation than you folks are. And I remember years ago, it was absolutely hilarious. I was in Toronto working in a Jewish company, and my closest co-worker was Muslim. So that's like all three Abrahamics right there. And this guy came up, and she just looked up at him, and she wished him Merry Christmas. And he got a little bit hoity on her about, no, it's all happy holidays. And this woman was, I swear, 5 foot nothing. And maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. And he was like 6'2", kind of a big guy. She got in his face, and she said, Ramadan was over a month ago. Hanukkah just ended. It's Merry Christmas. And I laughed so hard. But this is just a sense that in our wishing of happy holidays, I hope we don't kind of ignore what those holidays are and kind of treat it as a ubiquitous, because there's so many, like, I want to learn more about Diwali. I want to learn more. I mean, a wonderful Jewish rabbi friend that for years would always invite us to an open house feast on the final day of Hanukkah. And it was just so wonderful to sit in there and just listen to people around talk about a tradition that I wasn't part of, but wow, it was so fascinating, and the food was so good. Yeah. And I don't have much of an experience of Kwanzaa. I don't know if that's something that's really celebrated up here, but the friends I have with African heritage, I don't know if they've celebrated. They've never brought it up to me, so I don't know if that's something that I just have missed. But there's just so many other like that we could learn so much about if we would just kind of get over our obsession about ourselves and look at what else is going around and what we can learn from them.
I found that a good way to open that up, again, because I work on the phones and I talk to people all over the country from different heritages. What I usually say is happy holidays, whatever holiday it is you celebrate. And a lot of times that will open the door, and this person will say, well, I celebrate this. And then I have the opportunity to ask, well, what is that like? And it is, you're right. Yeah. It's very, I too had an experience where I was working for a publishing company that was owned by Jewish women, and a lot of the editorial staff and it was a small company. A lot of the folk there were Jewish, so they would take the high holy days off. I attended a bris. It was an unusual experience for me, but it was these things. Tasting food I'd never tasted, hearing music and language that I'd never heard before, and being invited into and welcomed into those celebrations of my friends who had different cultural heritages from me. That meant so much to me because they didn't have to invite me. I was an outsider there. I wasn't part of their faith. I was a coworker, and I felt very honored to be welcomed to those celebrations because, when you bring someone into your home like that, it means you matter to me, and I want to share who I am with you. So,
and if we take that and circle it all the way back to the beginnings of the spread of Christmas, you can understand how it developed and how it was personalized at the same time it was generalized.
Exactly.
Because these are not just experiences that you and I have at this time. People thousands, hundreds and thousands of years ago had these experiences too, where they visited with friends, where a traveler came by with something unique that they didn't understand, that new spices, new tastes, new whatevers came through. And I'm completely of the camp that the current problems we have with talking about faith is because we've tried to remove it completely from the public conversation, where we should be bringing all of it in and having everybody see. Like, we should have the Christmas tree and the menorah and whatever else up all at the same time, where we should have explanations. We should have all of this available so that people won't feel their need to so entrench in their own as a defense mechanism, and rather can relax into, because that, I think, is how tradition and faith spread in the first place. And through these celebrations that were just novel and curious and intriguing enough that people wanted to ask questions and learn more and learn the lyrics of songs and learn why you light the candles in that order and learn what's going on. I had you folks have Girl Scouts. We've got Girl Guides up here, and Girl Guides tries really hard not to prioritize any one religious tradition. So it's a really sensitive place. In fact, they try to have religion outside the conversation at all. And the teenagers that I worked with were not of that mind. They wanted to be able to share these parts of themselves. So we came up with this celebration of light, where we would sit in a circle and everybody had a tea light. And if one of the traditions we were talking about was your tradition, then you did the talking about it. If there was no one who represented that tradition, then I had cheat sheets for whomever. But as we all talked about these traditions, looked at it in this dark room, while we lit the candles, eventually the room wasn't dark anymore. It got lighter and lighter with each of them. And this is like the number one asked for meeting every year, is they wanted to do that. Oh, it was phenomenal. And it was so simple. And I know that other units have now picked up doing that because I explained how we had gone about doing it, but it was so gentle and it was so safe for the Jewish girl we had to express how her family and recognize at the same time that her family was not how everybody celebrated, and for the pagan one to explain how they celebrated in their family, and we didn't have anybody that celebrated Diwali, but we had enough variety in what was going on. And it is so rich this time of year, Christmas time of year, Yule time of year, solstice, that can be so rich for all of us. We kind of push capitalism and self-aggrandizement out of the way and just really start to look at all the special ways that we can celebrate. As a Christian, I'm going to interpret that as the love of Christ truly spreading through the world. A Jewish person is going to have a different take on that. In fact, they might, and I'm projecting here because I'm not Jewish, they might have a take that, with the lighting of the 8th candle, this is the miracle of light spreading and freedom spreading. You as a pagan are going to have a particular interpretation through your belief system, but all of them ultimately come with the same symbols and the same ultimate meaning of joy and acceptance and awareness and something really wonderful spreading through the population.
You were talking about how we want to experience these cultures. And I think that's one thing the modern mindset has that is hurting it in its understanding of the spread of culture. We have I try to explain to people who are younger than me that this is not normal to have access to all of this information, to all of this culture. It's not normal. This is not usual. I grew up in the 70s in a very rural area, and I promise you, we didn't get a lot of people from outside in. They would, we had the people who lived there, but the idea of tasting something new, of hearing a new story, because you couldn't just click on a computer and be exposed to everything in the world. When something new came in, you latched onto it. You wanted to hear that story. You wanted to hear that music because it was different and it was exciting. Now, go back 100 years when you never went more than 15 miles from the place you were born in your entire life. You have a traveler coming through. They're going to tell a story. You're going to listen to that story and you're going to incorporate it into your life. This idea that you can just get anything you want is so incredibly modern that even people our age can remember a time where it was not the case. You could not just go to Wikipedia. You had to get in your car and go to a library or borrow a book from interlibrary loan if you were lucky enough to have a library in your town. If you wanted to meet someone from another culture and you lived in a rural area, you had to get in your car or get on a bus or a train and go to a large city and seek those people out. The idea that all of these cultures are so mashed together is so new.
Yeah.
That people truly don't understand the allure of what's new and different from people who are isolated.
Yeah.
And it's hard to explain to younger people today what isolation of that nature feels like, because they don't have it.
No, and that makes our stories part of the social history that will again continue, but our names will fade.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Our passion about it will be not known, and yet something we are talking about will resonate so significantly that it's going to become someone else's story as they go forward.
And that is how humanity survives.
Yep, and that's how cultures spread.
Yep. And I'm not talking humanity in human beings. I'm talking humanity in our humanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at us.
Yeah.
I don't know. This all started with Christmas, didn't it?
Yeah. But a lot of things start with Christmas and just kind of grow and merge and do all sorts of wacky, wonderful things. It's a good feeling time of year, and nothing that can take away the joy of this. And that's why we have to also be really sensitive to the people who don't feel the joy of the season. We have a tradition in the churches that I'm part of Blue Christmas, and recognizing that this is a very hard, sad time of year for some folks.
Yes.
You alluded to a little bit of that in your own journey, and how the overemphasis of the capitalist machine on the happiest time of the year kind of thing really hurts people. And I think that's another part of the season that we can use. It's a time for outreach. It's a time for inclusion, and it's time to be compassionate for people who don't have all the different parts that the Hallmark movies represent as being the Christmas experience.
And then you have people like Kat. As you know, Kat lost her mother last year, and it was fairly traumatic because it happened right in the middle of COVID, and it was harsh. It happened in May, but that first Christmas without Joanne was sad. Yep. We really didn't celebrate Christmas last year or Solstice or anything. We bought presents. Those presents sat until February. We didn't even open them. Because we just weren't in that space. It was too hard. Yep. And that's the other part of it. While you're jumping through hoops of fire to be the happiest person on the planet, because that's what you're supposed to be, you're making it so much harder for people who are in grief or people who are suffering from depression. So that is another gift you can give. You don't have to just give money or things that you buy. You can go to someone is suffering, take that part of the season and give them time, give them energy, give them love, give them support, let them know they are not a freak because they're not happy right now. There's nothing wrong with you being in grief during the holiday seasons.
Yep.
And that is a form of compassion. That's another gift you can give that doesn't cost any money, but it does require sensitivity and observance and the actual desire to connect with other human beings, which is at the root of all of these things. Yep. We're connecting, whether it's around a campfire in a cave in Norway, waiting for the days to get longer, or whether it's in Toronto at a Christmas gathering.
Yep.
We're seeking each other out to get through the darkness into the light.
Yep. And a connected thought, but from the other perspective, is when you have children, you cannot take away from them, even no matter what you feel as an adult, you cannot take away from them the celebration of the season. It's contagious. They are so excited. And I've seen so many kids disappointed because the adults don't want to join them in their joy. We don't have the right to make a child feel like it's a horrible time of year. We should be giving them an option. I'm not up to date on Roman celebrations, but I believe there was a children's celebration right around the same time of this in Roman
Juvenalia.
society. Okay.
I did my research, baby.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you.
But the celebration for children is also part of this. This just is not an adult thought out thing, that there's genuine child joy in these things.
And yes, to a point, and I just want to offer a caveat here, as someone who has lived for years with clinical depression. This doesn't mean you have to put on your happy face and fake it.
No, children have a tremendous capacity to have people just like they are. It's adults have the issue, but children have a complete ability to feel compassion for someone while enjoying life themselves, or conversely, enjoy someone else's celebration while feeling less than happy themselves.
So you're not talking people who are in grief or depressed or just have some kind of, you're just talking about the spoil sports who are just going to sit there and go, oh, well, this is stupid. This isn't. Yeah. I think it's a fine line, because some people they don't want their kids to get wrapped up into the BS of it, which there is a lot of BS of it. Regardless of what you...
There's a lot of BS in the capitalist approach to it, but not the spiritual approach that underlines all these holidays. And see, that's the thing that I wish we're more comfortable bringing up to the light. It's almost like in our North American cultural fear of talking about any religion in particular. We have denied religion, at least that's the Canadian observation that I have. We've denied religion to such a point that it's become only a capitalist enterprise. And so a lot of this other stuff that people are lacking is that spirituality. It is that sense of community. It is that sense of culture and ritual and celebration that makes this time of year worth it. And no matter how you're feeling about it, it's still worth it.
And that's where you come into a problem. There is a religious aspect, and that is, render unto Caesar. That is the religious aspect of it. But the cultural aspect of it does not have to be tied to any religion. And the spiritual, we don't have enough dialogue and enough language in our cultures. I don't know about Canadian, but I know in America, to talk about community. It's almost as if religion has decided spirituality and community is our domain, and anyone who is not affiliated with a religion feels like they don't have the right to it's almost like you're separated from culture because you're separated from a religion. What we need to do is emphasize that community, culture, even spirituality, even if you're not a member of a formal faith, these things all exist in humanity. They are not tied to a single religion. So your lack of religion does not mean that you don't get to participate in community, that you don't get to participate in the human experience. And that's kind of almost an exclusionary thing at this time of year, where you feel if you're not part of some sort of faith, your only option is the commercial. There's got to be another option for people who are not part of an established religion, but who still want to feel that sense of community, which is why I think people in the LGBT community tend to fare better, because we tend to form families. We make families for ourselves, because a lot of members of the LGBT community have been rejected or marginalized by their own families. So if you can find a community that you're part of, then it's easier to get through this time of year. But for those people who have not found that community and who are not specifically religious, it's a really hard time of the year. And I can see where it would become very cynical, and they would not want their children to be part of something that they find exclusionary or crassly commercial.
I think Canadians are a little further along that discussion.
Yeah.
No. I'm not trying to dismiss this. I'm trying to put this together in my head as we're talking. I think we're a little further along in terms of recognizing that we shouldn't be excluding each other. The doors are open. People are welcome to share back and forth. But I think you might have really hit on something as to the universal identifier right now is the capitalist experience. Not necessarily the individual cultural celebration, which might not feel inviting to others and might not actually be inviting to others.
Mm-hmm.
So that puts a wrinkle in our complete dismissing of the capitalist experience, all while the capitalist experience is undermining the richness that is experienced by those who are in community.
Right. And the thing is, I mentioned earlier that we've traded one type of isolation for another. I was in the middle of nowhere. I didn't have any neighbors, but I had a community. Whereas people now have access to any culture they want in the world, but some of them are really struggling to find a community of friends and family that they can have a shared history with and that they can have in-jokes with. And I see it a lot in social media. I see people trying to build communities on Twitter, on Facebook, trying to find that. And we've sort of digitalized our communities in the world now, and it's a different form of community, and we're going to have to find our footing as a species, because we've transferred that from the drawing room to the chat room, and it's a profound change in the way we form communities. And I think we're going through a period right now where it is extremely difficult for us to find our footing and just to know where we belong as human beings.
Yeah, it is. And I've had a couple of atheists jump on me for this one, but I think it's not lost on me that this is happening right around the time when there is a spiritual malaise that is happening in general community. Just because you're spiritual does not mean you have to identify with the dominant tradition. You and I both know that. But this sense of otherness, the sense of something else pulling us together that is not a superficial connection. And yeah, those communities are being formed online in a lot of ways, but they're being formed with their intangible sense of each other that informs a sense of spiritual connection. And I think that's why I think we need more of celebrations like Christmas and Yule and Hanukkah and eventually all the other celebrations we have, not because they are exclusive domains of a particular tradition, but because they are opportunities for us to open our doors to others, to make them feel like they can be part of something traditional and something spiritual and something worshipful, without... If we're smart enough to not impose the barriers of exclusivity, it can be an incredibly welcoming experience.
Exactly. And that is something we as people have to do on our own. We can't wait for our leaders to do it, because our leaders they've got their hands full. We are society. Every single person listening to this podcast is society. You have the right to make society. So, get off your ass. I'm sorry. Don't sit there and wait for culture to come to you. If you have a friend or a neighbor, say hello to them. Bring them some cookies or something. Just connect. It's hard. It's hard to do, but it's never that hard that you can't just say hi or good afternoon or happy holidays, something that will just take you out of your own internalism and maybe bring someone else out of theirs. You have the ability to change the world every time you interact with another human being. It may just be in a tiny, tiny way, but you can't wait for a religion or a government or a holiday movie to tell you how to be a human being. You just got to go out there and do it.
Yep. And as leaders, those of us who are in those roles, our job is to inspire, to encourage, to give ideas about how to do it, and how to open the outstretched arm. Because really, when you get back down to it, that's kind of what we're celebrating at this time of year.
Did I ever tell you? Okay, did I ever tell you about fairy bombing?
I don't think so.
This is something Kat and I used to do back in Kentucky when we were living in Kentucky. We haven't done as much of it in Phoenix because it's just a little harder to do here. But what we would do is we would buy tiny little gifts. Like one year we made little gift wrapped candy canes with little Christmas ornaments attached to them. And we would go out and we would find a house, generally a house that looked like they were decorated for Christmas. That, like, one year we would say, do you have a light up deer in your yard, or do you have a wreath on your door? You would find that house, and then you would take that little gift and you just tuck it in onto their doorstep, or tuck it into their mailbox if they had a mailbox you can get into. And it had little cards that you've been fairy bombed. Thank you for spreading the joy.
Oh, that's
and
sweet.
You do it randomly or based on that. And you would do that once a night for every night. And then you never know what the person's reaction would be because you weren't there to see their reaction. I've had it done to me. And I know that when I was fairy bombed, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. How neat is this? Somebody left a little gift card in a book that I was reading, or a library book. Things like that. We would put little candy canes at the grocery store. We had leftover candy canes, so they would have they were selling the stockings. We would slip candy canes into the stockings at the store. So when the person bought the stocking, they'd bring it home and they'd find a candy cane. It's just little things like that can spread joy. They don't cost you anything except maybe $1 or $2 for a box of candy canes. And you can totally transform someone's day. That you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to be really commercialism if you have imagination and you have the desire to do that.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to think about that, and I might include that, if with your permission, in something I produce on my website.
I love it. Yes, please. We call it fairy bombing. Some people call it glitter bombing. It's just these random acts of completely anonymous generosity or cheer that you give to other people. And you don't ever find out what the result's going to be. You hope for the best. You hope it's not going to trigger somebody, but it's definitely something you can do. And it's so much fun.
I bet.
Really,
yeah.
Well, look at us.
That's great. Yeah, we've gone from celebration to social issue and back to celebration. So that's
a lot of fun. It always comes back to celebration, doesn't it?
Well, and especially this topic, it should come back to celebration, because it's a good time of year.
I want you to know that before we hit record, I was feeling really down today. I really was, and I was.
Yep.
And we almost didn't record today, and I'm so glad we did.
Yeah, me too.
Because I feel much better.
Yep. And one of these days, you know what? I'm going to have you up in the snow, and you can understand how we celebrate with snow people and mittens and toboggans. Well, I mean, some years it's been so warm, I've been outside in my bare feet on Christmas Day, but not all the time. Most of the time it's snow. And there's this a joy and a newness of the glittering white all around you. I'm going to convince you it's going to happen. You're going to love snow at some point.
I lived in a place that had snow, and yes, it's pretty from the inside. No, it is not pretty when you have to go out and go to work in the morning. I just don't like it.
Okay, well, I'll grant you that one.
Okay, one of these days you're going to expose me for my soft, mushy inside, but I'm going to just play the codger until I can as long as I can get away with it. Okay?
Yeah, jigs up, child.
Well, I think we have really covered some good ground today.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy your holiday season.
You too. Yeah.
And I may even watch a Hallmark movie for you because my wife will make me. But
that's because I like Kat. She understands.
You and Kat are like two of a kind with those stupid holiday movies.
You know what? You and Rua have the same opinion. So, it's tit for tat. We each got one of each other's family.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us on this somewhat meandering conversation. Deb, next time we're going to be looking into some pagan stuff and just, you're going to turn it around on me and you're going to expose the world to how I don't know anything about paganism.
Oh, I think you know a whole lot more than you think you do. And you certainly know a whole lot more than I do. So it's going to be fun.
Oh, God. Oh, my gosh. The uninformed leading the uninformed. We should have so much fun.
It won't be the first time in history.
Okay. Well, I'm Deb Bodwin, and you are?
I'm Deb Sutter.
And you guys have been listening to The Preacher and the Pagan. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Yep. And happy holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays.
You've been listening to The Preacher and the Pagan with Deborah Suttard and Deborah Bodwin. This podcast is a two-lady podcast production in conjunction with the Barefoot Evangelist. Our producer and sound editor is Catherine Gordon. Our theme music was composed by Deborah Bodwin. You can reach us at thepreacherandthepagan@gmail.com or by visiting our website at barefootevangelist.ca/podcast.